Dear friends, good morning. I am Lin Xingyi. I'm the researcher from National Human Rights Museum of Taiwan. It's really my pleasure to meet you all, and we are really happy that we have the pleasure to co-organize with ICSC, the International Migration and Human Rights Online Forum and Workshop. Human Rights Museum of Taiwan was established in 2018. And under the museum, there are two sites, one in Green Island and another one in Jingmei. And it aims to preserve the past history of white terror. And we would also like to help our public to learn about the importance of human rights values. And also, together with like-minded NGOs, we would like to work together to promote human rights issues so we can show our determination for our pursuit of universal human rights. And as the first national level human rights museum in Asia Pacific region, we became ICSC member, and we also have joined the International Federation of Museums, so we can work together to build a network of negative heritage museums. Therefore, in 2019, we have established Firm App in Taiwan. And Firm App started out with our own Taiwanese human rights past. We would like to promote the practice of human rights in Asian Pacific area, and together by networking with human rights museums, organizations, associations around this region, we would like to facilitate the discussion of human rights issues and also promote human rights as universal values. And we see international migration is on the rise, and how do we approach and address the different impacts being brought into the society by international migrants? And different people like museum actors, states and NGOs, and each one individual all play a critical role. And how do we approach our relation with migrant communities? How do we work with them? And how do we develop community-based exhibitions and educational programs? And how do we bridge that channel for conversation to facilitate inclusiveness in the society? And this is the aim of this forum. We would like to hear from different countries, different experiences. So we have invited organizations and museum representatives from Taiwan, Bangladesh, Tibet, United States, France, Australia, and East Africa. So we have professionals who have been working in this area for a long time as the first line worker. So through these 3 days, they're going to share with us their practical experiences, giving us the insight into the groundwork of human rights. And we would also like to encourage the exchange between human rights practitioners in different countries so we can facilitate opportunities for international collaboration, even from different fields. And again, we would like to thank our partners of ICSC, Linda Norris, Brendan Painter, and also a lot of people who have signed up for this forum. It is really our pleasure to work with you all for the cause of universal human rights. And also this forum provides simultaneous interpreting service. If you need to listen to the Chinese or English channel for interpreting, you can turn it on. And I hope you a wonderful and successful online forum. Thank you. And let's welcome the first opening speaker for our first session. The moderator would be Linda Norris, and she will be the moderator of this session. And in this session, we have speakers from Wing Look Museum of the Asian Pacific American Experience, Mikala Woodward, and also Rohini Kapada. She is the general manager of Immigration Museum from Australia, and also Yuan Xuwen, Research Assistant from Kaohsiung, and as well as Li Yingshen, Section Chief of Kaohsiung Museum of Labor. Thank you. Now I'm going to give the floor to our moderator.
Thank you, Shenyi, and it's such a pleasure to be home in the countryside of upstate New York with all of you in this way. The last 2 years have taught us that we can get together in all kinds of ways. So it's a pleasure to be at least remotely with all of you. I want to express my thanks to the museum in Taiwan for inviting us to be partners in this really important effort. We're honored, and it is truly a pleasure to have put together what we hope is a really wonderful few days for all of you to think together, to consider together, to learn together in a global way. So we're excited by that. I just wanted to say a little bit about the ICSC, the International Coalition of Sites of Conscience. We are the only global network of museums, historic sites, and memory initiatives dedicated to the idea that we can create a more just future by using the tools of the past. We have more than 330 members in 67, maybe 68 countries as of this week. You'll hear from many of them this week. But we have many different kinds of organizations. We have history museums, we have art museums, we have parks, we have places of memory, we have online museums. And what they do bring together is this sense of values that it's not enough just to remember history. We need to put it to use. And we, as museums and historic sites and memory initiatives, all have a job, as Shenyi mentioned earlier, to work with our communities to help others think about the value of human rights and about how we extend it to everyone. So that's a little bit about what Sites of Conscience does. You'll hear more specifically from lots of people over the next couple days. So as we begin to think about migration, which is on the rise, there's more people on the move now than ever before for all kinds of reasons, for economic reasons, for reasons of climate change all over, for reasons of war and discrimination. So international migrants are on the move everywhere. And it's a big question for every community. Well, what are we going to do? How are we going to welcome these people? Are we going to welcome these people? Some communities really consider that. And museums have vital roles to play in thinking about how to welcome newcomers to our communities, and as well to help receiving communities understand more about where people come from, what they do, how to make them welcome in a community. Those are amazing jobs. How can we decrease and challenge through dialogue stereotypes, discrimination, and xenophobia in the mainstream consciousness? And to be honest, that happens everywhere in the world. Those issues are in play almost everywhere. And so the opportunities for museums and NGOs, I know some of you are from NGOs, are so great for us to make a real difference. We, as museums, have a unique set of tools and can develop a unique set of skills to help us work on that. So this panel, in a way, is really both local and global, which is in a way how this work always works. We're so pleased to have 4 speakers. I'm going to introduce them all at once, and then they'll each present, and then we'll have time for conversation at the end. As you have questions as we go along, please feel free to put them in the chat room, and we'll pick them up and translate them at the end of the time. So please feel free to ask questions away. So our panel, Michaela Woodward has worked in museums and community organizations in the Pacific Northwest of the United States for more than 30 years. She's a museum educator, community historian, and public artist, winning awards for her interactive art installations and interdisciplinary history projects with students. She's currently senior exhibit developer at the Wing Luke Museum of the Asian Pacific American Experience in Seattle, where she facilitates their community-based exhibitions, which you're going to hear a lot about today. And she also manages the museum's oral history program. She has an MA in museology from the University of Washington and a BA in history from Swarthmore College. Rohini Kapadath is on the leadership team at Museums Victoria in Australia. It's Australia's largest public museums organization, and she's general manager of the Immigration Museum. She's been leading the transformation of the Immigration Museum into a vibrant and contemporary cultural institution that harnesses Melbourne's diversity and unites communities through shared stories of humanities and culture. She brings decades of professional and corporate experience across technology, professional services, and the arts. And she's done all kinds of things as a part of her commitment to innovation, social enterprise, and urban placemaking. So we're happy to have those two, I should say, those museums are both members of the Sites of Conscience Migration Museums Network, which is a project of the Coalition. Additionally, our speakers, Shu Wen Yuan, oh, I don't know how I did there, is and my apologies, is a research assistant of the Education Department of the National Taiwan Museum. Her research mainly focuses on social inclusion and museum accessibility of international migration in Taiwan society. She started the Immigration Docent Project in the museum in 2015, which provides multilingual tours and helps the museum connect with migrant communities. Those migrant communities have achieved and initiated festivals of Southeast Asian countries, exhibitions, educational activities, and interpretation of collections from Southeast Asian countries. Ying Xuan Li is chief of the exhibition section at the Labor and Education Life Center, Labor Affairs Bureau of Kaohsiung City Government, responsible for the administration affairs of the Kaohsiung Museum of Labor. She is a graduate of National Cheng Chi University and did graduate study in the Department of Theater Arts at National Sun Yat-sen University. She's worked in labor-related affairs for her most of her career, so we're really excited to have that perspective with us as well. Again, please put your questions in the chat room, and we will come back to them at the end. But Michaela, please begin.
Thank you. There we go. Hello. Thank you so much. It's a real honor to be here, and it's been really interesting thinking about how our work at our museum fits into an international context. So I really appreciate this opportunity. So I'm Michaela Woodward. I've been for 10 years, I've been an exhibit developer at the Wing Luke Museum. And I'm going to share a little bit about what we do and our community-based exhibits process, and try to talk about how this process, these kinds of projects, can help facilitate understanding between new arrivals in a country and established residents, and foster healing from past trauma and build more inclusive, compassionate, and just communities. So you can go to the next slide. Great. So first, a bit about the museum. We occupy a historic building in Seattle's Chinatown. I will say in Seattle's Chinatown, a historic building is 100 years old. So that is not really very old, I know. And part of this space has been preserved to share the stories of immigrants who lived in the building when it was a residence hotel, and the rest has been converted to galleries, gathering spaces, and workspaces for the staff. Our mission is to connect everyone to the dynamic history, cultures, and art of Asian Pacific Americans through vivid storytelling and inspiring experiences to advance racial and social equity. And I should clarify that when I say Asian Pacific Americans, that refers to immigrants from Asian and Pacific Island countries and their descendants living in the United States. Next slide. Yeah, so we are, the museum started in the 1960s. We're named after Wing Luke, who was born in China and came to the US as a young child in the 1930s. He grew up and served on the Seattle City Council, and then passed away in a plane crash at the age of 40, tragically. And there was a memorial fund, which was the seed money to start this museum in his honor. Originally, the museum focused on collecting and exhibiting Asian folk arts. Next slide. And it wasn't until the 1990s that the museum began to look at shift to the experiences of Asian immigrants and their descendants in the United States. Our first Asian American director was Ron Chu, and he was really responsible for that shift. He also pioneered our community-based model. And the first exhibit that was produced in this way was in 1992. It was called Executive Order 9066, 50 years before and 50 years after. And I'm going to just talk a little bit about this exhibit just as an example of the power of this process. So just for context, Executive Order 9066 was signed by President Roosevelt in 1942, shortly after the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor and the United States entered World War II. It authorized the incarceration of everyone of Japanese descent on the west coast of the United States. They were supposed to be the enemy, but most of them were in fact American citizens, and they should have had rights, but their rights were ignored. They did not get trials or compensation. They lost their jobs and businesses and everything, and were behind bars, behind barbed wire for 4 years during the war. And for many years after the war, this history had been erased and ignored. So bringing out these stories was tremendously important as a step to get the country to acknowledge and address this injustice. Then this exhibit was created by 30 or more people who had direct experience of living in the camps and their children. And they were brought together, and they really were given a lot of authority to create the exhibit's themes, messages, content, design. They were in there building the cases for the exhibit. In this situation, the story of the Japanese American incarceration was told by the people who had directly experienced it. They told their own story, and it was first-person voices sharing these personal experiences. It was very humanizing and powerful, and it was undeniable. It was, you couldn't argue about whether this had happened when you were hearing directly from a person who had experienced it. Next slide. So the group wanted to look at the past, so the 50 years before the incarceration, and to show that this executive order was not simply a response to Pearl Harbor, but it was really building on decades of discrimination and violence against Asian immigrants. These are some painful images, but we didn't want to shy away from them. And, sadly, discrimination and violence against Asian immigrants has not ended in the United States. But it is much less acceptable today. It is illegal, mostly, for one thing. And when it happens, people speak out against it and stand up for people. We can go to the next slide. And the exhibit told the story of that sort of cultural shift as well in the 50 years after part of the exhibit. The legacy of the incarceration for Japanese American community and also for the nation as a whole. So there was this trauma that was passed down through generations. It took decades for people to speak up and share their stories. And museum exhibits like this one, there were others, played a role in encouraging Japanese Americans to share their stories and getting the rest of the country to really understand what had happened and begin to face this shameful history. And the Japanese American community succeeded in getting the United States government to formally apologize and issue financial compensation to the survivors of the camps. This was good for the survivors, but as they kept pointing out, it was really for the good of the nation to right this wrong and to make it less likely to happen again. Japanese Americans remain a powerful voice in immigrant rights and racial justice to this day. Okay, so this is the next slide. So that was the first exhibit that we did with the community-based process. We do it for most of our exhibits. It evolves, it's different each time. but the Community Advisory Committee is the heart of the process every time. They provide direction for the exhibit. They connect us to people who will have stories and artworks and artifacts and images to put in the exhibit. They bring their people to see the exhibit. They're very excited when the show opens. They want to share it. And this has been an important part of our sustainability as a museum. It helps us build our visitorship, our membership, our donor base. So it's been a growth strategy for us as well. Next slide. So this is the sort of cryptic diagram that we show people as if you will now understand. But really the blue circle in the middle is the Community Advisory Committee. You can see the arrows radiating out to the larger circles of community. And then underneath there's sort of the support of the museum and its resources and expertise, and the other resources and expertise that we pull in through contractors and partnerships. Next slide. This is another, I think of this as another diagram that explains our process. This is a nurse log. It's a pretty common sight in the old growth forest here in the Pacific Northwest. An old tree has died and fallen down, and new trees are growing up from the trunk. And I think about this when I'm starting a project, especially if it's with a new community. We have lots of solid relationships with some of the Asian American communities and Pacific Island communities in the US, but there are so many. We are always reaching out to new communities. And I always remind myself, this is not going to happen all at once. We're going to start small and build trust, and each project will provide connections and ideas and nourishment for the next project. Our relationships will deepen and broaden, and over time we will have this strong ecosystem that will to share these stories. So next slide. So these are the museum's values. We have them written on the wall in our conference room, and I honestly could quote them to you from memory. We really live by these values. People and relationships are really at the heart of what we do. We want people to feel ownership and a stake. We want to empower people to share their own stories as they have experienced them. We know that this is not the quickest way or easiest way to make exhibits. It takes a lot of extra time and energy. It means being flexible and open to changes, and really being willing to relinquish some control and authority to this group that we're working with. Next slide. All right. I want to talk about another exhibit that we did more recently. This was in 2015. Naga Sheds Its Skin. This was an exhibit we did with the Khmer community, so people from Cambodia, Cambodian Americans. So again, we had a group of people with connections, different generations, different connections to the community, and they figured out what they wanted the exhibit to say and what they wanted to put in it. And to them, they really wanted to point out, like, we cannot forget our past, but we don't want our history to define us. That was kind of one of the things they wanted to say. So visitors who came to this show learned a lot about this community. The show dispelled misconceptions and stereotypes about the Khmer community among the larger society. It gave people a much deeper understanding of the rich culture and long history of Cambodia, the traumatic experience this community has been through, and the ongoing legacy of that trauma, and how people have survived and built a new home, new lives in the United States. Next slide. And so that was all very important. What visitors who were not Khmer learned from the exhibit was very important. But in some ways, I think the most powerful effect of this exhibit happened within the Khmer community. As with the Japanese American community, there were a lot of intergenerational conversations that had not happened before that needed to happen. And this process gave space for those conversations and connections and healing. At the opening event for this exhibit, the big gallery full of people who, had lived through the Khmer Rouge, their parents had. A lot of traumatic and terrible things had happened to them. And at the opening event, they're all gathered together and we had a Buddhist blessing ceremony. This very young monk, I think he was a teenager at the time, he started to chant in this ancient chant, and everybody in the room joined in. And it really just created this huge expanse of time and space that gave this context to these traumatic years of the Khmer Rouge, but also opened up the possibilities for other things to happen and for the beauty and strength of this community to shine through. And it was a very moving experience. And even now, years later, many more exhibits have been in this gallery, but when I walk into this space, I can still feel that energy. And I think that, so we really do this also for the communities. You may not see on the wall all of the things that have happened in the course of the process. Next slide. Yeah. So one of the things, another important opportunity these exhibits provide, I think, is for, especially for second and third generation people in an immigrant community, to really explore and kind of create new identities in their new home. In the US, we used to talk about like assimilation as the goal. Like, we want you to get rid of your accent and your weird food and like eat hamburgers and be American. And I think we have come to realize that that really means losing a lot of connection to your heritage and your ancestors and the strength that you get from that. And we have, I think, hopefully learned to embrace a more complicated and nuanced and layered concept of American identity. And we want people to find a way to maintain those ties to the past, to their ancestors and their cultural heritage, and pass that down to their children, even as they're putting down roots and bringing up those children in a new place with a whole new culture. And so their identities are going to need to reflect all of that. And this is a challenge that many immigrant communities have faced over centuries in the United States, and of course, elsewhere, everywhere in the world. So next slide, please. So this is an example of one of the, just one thing that we have up on the wall right now. We have an exhibit called Paths Intertwined that is artists from the Chinese diaspora, including Taiwan. So Agnes Lee was born in China and grew up in Taiwan, and her work incorporates traditional Chinese poetry. So this is Li Po's poem, Drinking Alone Under the Moon, classic poem. And she has used traditional Chinese calligraphy to layer and layer and layer this poem over and over and over to make this kind of abstract image, and around this image of the moon. And this was part of a series she created in honor of the 50th anniversary of the US moon landing. In 2019 was the 50th anniversary. So she's an example of somebody who she's an immigrant to the United States and has thinks of herself as having this multi-layered identity, and her artwork reflects both her connection to her heritage and also her relationship to the new home that she has been living in. All right, next slide. I just wanted to include this one. Eliachi Kimaro was a person who was featured in one of our exhibits about Korean American identity. And she comes from a mixed family, so Korean American and African American also. And she has this, she says that her response to having her family's story on display was this sense of feeling seen. And that was like one of the first times she had felt like, okay, our family is in this honored place and on the wall of a museum, and we have a place here and we're being recognized. And that was a very powerful feeling for her. That is a common thing that we get from visitors or from participants in our exhibits. Okay, one more slide. Yeah, and so the final point that I wanted to make is, as we're sharing these first-person stories and doing these conversations that help heal people's trauma and all of this, we're trying to also create connections with the visitors and their family histories, people who are not part of this particular community. So in the United States, you know, we pride ourselves, many of us, on being a nation of immigrants. We have not always lived up to that ideal, but there is truth to it. We often say, like, if you're not a Native American, an Indigenous person, then, you know, your family arrived here from somewhere at some point. So think about, like, when did that happen? What was it like? How has it shaped who you are today? And how does your family's story relate to the stories of other people who have arrived in other ways at different times? So we can help people discover those shared experiences and tie the visitor to this particular immigrant story, even if they're not part of that community. And, you know, in the end, we want the visitor to go away feeling like our national story has room for all of us, all of these different communities. So that is my last slide. I hope I'm under time or at time.
You are absolutely under time. Thank you, Michaela. The Wing Loop's community advisory process has been a model for so long, for so many people. So it's really great. Again, just a reminder, everyone, if you have questions, please put them in the chat room and we'll come back to them at the end of all the presentations. But Rohini, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Linda. And to begin, I acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that I'm speaking to you from, the Boonwurrung and the Woiwurrung people of the Kulin Nations, and pay respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Our First Peoples have cared for our country, our rivers, and our waterways for over 60,000 years, and have never ceded their sovereignty over these lands. Let's go to the next slide. Thank you for the opportunity to deliver this talk today on the ever-evolving role of museums in citizens' engagement to drive social cohesion in our local communities. Today, I'm delighted to be shining the light on the work being done by the Immigration Museum, a museum that is located in the heart of Melbourne City, one of the most diverse geographies on the planet. Melbourne has the 10th largest immigrant population among world metropolitan areas, encompassing migrants born in nearly every country worldwide. And in 2020, almost 30% of the population was born overseas. Our migrant population has brought rich cultures with them to this city and over 230 spoken languages, making the creative and cultural work produced here intrinsically diverse, contemporary, and international. So the Immigration Museum intentionally supports difference and multiplicity of cultures as core to its daily life. The museum contributes to creating thriving futures for migrant communities through the promotion of intercultural understanding and acceptance that leads to social cohesion and peaceful integration of diverse communities. Slide 4, please. Museums house the cultural soul of a nation, and in fact, museums are culture in action. Museums are most effective when they're rooted in their societies, when they grow from their communities and can provide visions for the future. And as societies change, so must museums to better reflect their histories and current realities. Today's museums, like Immigration Museum, are more than places to preserve the art, artifacts, and memories of the past. To the next slide, please. They are the new town square where diverse members of the community can come together and consider the big questions and issues of our times against the backdrop of culture and history. And they can be places that build capacity for inclusive democracies. Equal and inclusive participation of a diverse citizenry in public and private life is a fundamental aspect of a peaceful and just society. Museums like Immigration Museum have a capacity to improve opportunities for previously marginalized groups to participate in democratic institutions and mechanisms, thereby promoting positive discourse and social cohesion. We have some great examples of such civic engagement being led by the museum, which I will share in the course of this presentation. To the next slide, please, slide 6. As a site of trusted knowledge on the history and contemporary life of Victorians, we've found that the closer we work with communities and the more we cede narrative control through a curation model, the better our outcomes are. And since opening in Old Customs House in 1998, the museum has welcomed more than 2 million visitors, worked with more than 100 community organizations to highlight the city's origins and share stories of those who have migrated here and the positive influences they have had in cultivating a rich multicultural society. As we take Immigration Museum into the future, I've been considering our role as a local museum based in the heart of the city and the responsibility we bear to better embrace, illuminate, and include the voice, authorship, and agency of our local communities, and particularly those underrepresented. Indeed, museums across the world are evolving. Many have begun taking the necessary steps by redefining their missions to reflect the expectations of a changing world, by diversifying their boards and staff, by approaching narratives with new eyes, and by asking questions about purpose. Why do we exist? Who do we serve? Whose voice are we amplifying? And whose voices are we not hearing? Making room for these new narratives requires peeling away layers of cultural bias, blind spots, and it starts by accepting a new truth. Next slide, please. The simple truth is that there is more than one truth. By recognizing the value of multiple perspectives and accepting other viewpoints, we grow in empathy and in our understanding of a humanity that is way more encompassing and supportive. Conveying a multiplicity of truths while also enabling a visitor to include their own truth is an area of museum practice and expertise that requires deep empathy, deep listening, and deeply collaborative styles of storytelling and engagement that help us eventually to unearth common ground. Things about the human experience that unite us. This is the greatest gift that the arts can offer us, the ability to see someone else's perspective. Slide 9, please. In 2019, the Immigration Museum joined a global movement, Off by For All, aimed at helping institutions become for their whole community by becoming representative of them and co-curated by them. The Immigration Museum was part of the first wave of 21 organizations committed to this program, led by Nina Simon. Being a part of this global change network has amplified our ability to lead inclusive change. We checked our assumptions and learned from our community. And in ways big and small, since 2018, and before that too, we have been actively engaged in opening up our organization and inviting diverse artists to share their voices. We have taken important steps to making our museum of, by, and for our community. Our public programming is an important vehicle for living the values of Off by For All. The model is driven by partnerships with organizations like the Melbourne Writers Festival, Midsummer, Afro Hub, Melbourne Music Week, Multicultural Arts Victoria. And it's also shaped through co-curation with artists and performers, linking the programs back to our exhibition content and themes wherever we can. Slide 10, please. Currently, our museum is exhibiting photographic works of Atonga Tem, a Melbourne-based artist originally from South Sudan. Greater diversity means richer, more authentic, culturally nuanced, and meaningful arts and cultural experiences, coupled with a shared sense of belonging for everyone. Slide 11. We're actively considering best practice in representation by regularly asking ourselves, whose stories are we telling? Whose stories are we not telling? Slide 12, please. Museums bring people together, migrants and non-migrants, through public events, workshops, and lectures. There is no doubt our future lies in developing creative and collaborative approaches to cultural participation. And living this vision calls on the museum to be a provocateur, to boldly raise issues that are relevant to our migrant communities and hold powerful conversations that address them. Slide 13, please. The Immigration Museum's transformation project has evolved over the last couple of years. It has seen us expand our interpretive approaches and our content, along with the concept of our shared humanity and exploring themes embracing diversity in all its myriad forms. We are also expanding our understandings of migration to be more global, more contemporary, more fluid, and less fixed. The museum has been looking at exhibition ideas which explore universal human themes that we all have in common. This is part of Immigration Museum's transformation process to embrace themes broader than immigration, to include identity, belonging, difference, and broader definitions of migration. These more conceptual themes expand the museum's opportunities to co-create experiences of broad contemporary relevance, which can have real social impact. Slide 14, please. International students are an enormous cohort in Melbourne, and our recent installation, Forget the Stereotypes, focuses on relevant issues relating to identity, belonging, and temporary migration from the lens of international students. This focus also offers huge potential to tap into a whole new audience and present our museums as a site of relevance to this group, a place they can bring visiting families, as well as a site where students feel embraced and their stories heard. This is of particular importance at a time when international students have been, until recently, excluded from much of the government's support during COVID. They're cut off from their home countries, families, and local communities while in isolation. One of our newest installations, Forget the Stereotypes, encourages our visitors to reflect on their own experiences and empathizes with the experiences of other people. By being exposed to real people and their lived experiences, visitors discover rich personal and individual stories behind the anonymous collective presented in the media, and to rethink assumptions about the definition of migration in contemporary Australia beyond the linear and permanent, and how temporary migrants enrich Australian society. Sharing these stories and life experiences and skills in a welcoming social environment is completely integral to the Immigration Museum's purpose. As a result, next slide please, the museum has supported and initiated projects that are inspired by active listening to the needs and aspirations of communities we serve and consider to be our valuable partners. The Immigration Museum's annual Iftar dinner, presented in collaboration with Benevolence Australia and Moroccan Soup Bar, brings together diverse voices for a ceremonial gathering as Muslims break their daily fast during the month of Ramadan. The aim is to spread the message of unity and our shared humanity while raising awareness and understanding of the positive values underpinning Islam. Slide 16, please. Here's another example, Under the Olive Tree. It's a unique example of how the museum has encouraged greater understanding between two communities that have historically been in conflict. It is an annual event that sees musicians from our local Jewish and Arabic communities meet under an olive tree, a symbol that is significant to both cultures, to engage in a joyous musical celebration that aims to unite across cultures. Slide 17, please. At a grassroots level, Immigration Museum is an active member of the Victorian Multicultural Commission's Connect community, consisting of over 125 social and community organizations contributing to the social, cultural, and economic recovery of the city. I'd like to shine the light on our ongoing work annually with the African Australian community, which reflects the museum's investment in deep capacity building work with migrant communities as they reshape their identities and prevailing narratives to claim their rightful place in our democracy. We commenced this work in 2018-2019 when the narrative of African gangs took hold in the public discourse here in Victoria. We took great care to ensure that multiple perspectives were brought together to help create an alternative narrative over forums held in the museum in collaboration with Monash University, which saw community leaders, the Victoria Police, young leaders, and at-risk youth come together to build shared solutions. We've continued to build on this positive work and more recently collaborated with African Music and Cultural Festival and Africa Day to bring a festival celebrating African culture and voices of leadership, which then resulted in a subsequent forum where the museum created a safe space for community leaders to build new narratives to reimagine contemporary African Australian identity in 2021. These moments are vital and meaningful steps towards a society free of discrimination that affords equal opportunities to all. It requires perseverance, consistency, and an ever-growing trust between institutions, organizations, and people on the ground. It requires museums like Immigration Museum to create culturally safe practices and spaces so that the community can bring its hopes and aspirations to its spaces. It is essential that the approach is genuine and authentic. This work is not always easy to navigate both internally and externally. It often requires embracing change and new partnership models. Again, it requires awareness around questions such as who has the knowledge, who drives the conversation, who creates and shapes the narratives. It requires handing over agency to the knowledge holders and those with lived experience. It invites the voices of community into museum spaces. As museums work to decolonize their practice, we are looking to put community engagement at the core of our collection department. Our recent exhibition, Becoming You, is the result of a public call out for coming-of-age stories. Ultimately, we want to create and strengthen bonds between the community and their collection and the exhibitions. Slide 18, please. Our work in museums has never been more important and drives us forward towards achieving Museums Victoria's vision of a society compelled to act for a thriving future for all. Through our education programs, young Australian minds explore issues of asylum, refugee status, and Australia's settlement policies while looking through the lens of identity. They reflect on what it means to belong and not belong in Australia, and to explore culturally diverse communities in Victoria, and interrogate prejudice, stereotyping, and difference. Students consider what actions they can take to support each member of their community and identify ways to be active and informed global citizens. Slide 19, please. The exhibition Identity, Yours, Mine, and Ours explores who we are, who others think we are, and what it means to belong and not belong in Australia. The exhibition focuses on how cultural heritage, languages, beliefs, and family connections have and do influence our self-perceptions and our perceptions of others. Our perceptions can lead to discovery, confusion, prejudice, and understanding. And this provides opportunities to reflect on what it means to be part of various communities in the 21st century, whether family, local, national, or international. At a national level, intercultural understanding is key. It's one of the general capabilities underpinning the Australian curriculum. Slide 20, please. And after a period of community consultation around how Immigration Museum can best continue to serve the community and maintain relevance, we developed a refreshed mission statement for the museum in 2019, which reads, "People connected to our shared humanity and embracing diversity for a just future." The concepts in our statement intersect directly with the broader Museums Victoria vision of people enriched by wondrous discovery and trusted knowledge, and a society compelled to act for a thriving future. Both of these statements acknowledge the importance of connection to achieving social cohesion and peace, but also that there is work to be done by all of us towards this goal. Our aim was to reflect the changing immigration and migrant experience, including that of first, second, and third generation migrants, temporary migrants, international students, asylum seekers, and refugees, as well as the intersection of ethnicity and cultural heritage with other facets of identity, such as gender, politics, disability, and sexual identity. Our hope is that by sharing diverse stories under central themes that unite us, we can create opportunities for empathy and understanding, which are the bedrock of peaceful coexistence among humans. Thank you.
Thank you, Rohini. You are exactly on time. You're perfect. Was great. So much to dig into from both of your presentations. Really great. We have one question in the chat room. We'll come back to it at the end after two more presentations. And I wanna encourage all of you to put your questions in the chat in English or Chinese, and we will work on answering them. So from really vast sides of the Pacific, Michaela and Rohini, and now to focus a little bit more locally on issues from Taiwan, which I know all three of us are really excited to learn more about. So Xiu Wen, it's your turn. Please go ahead.
Good day. Good day, everyone. My name is Xu Wen Yuan. You can just call me Emily. That would be better. It would be easier. First of all, I'm very honored to be here to share what we did in National Taiwan Museum. So we talk about museum and social inclusion when transnational migration arrives. Transnational migration here, including immigrants who came to Taiwan because of marriage. We talk about migrant workers, maybe some of the international students. All this, how we do in our museum. So next slide, please. Next slide. Okay. This is National Taiwan Museum, name in Chinese and Mandarin, but the next one I'm going in English and Mandarin. The next slide, please. I would like to use the next slide to quickly show the 4 branches of our museum. And we show the
国立台湾博物馆有4座分馆，以典雅精致的古迹建筑群，呈现专属台湾的宝藏与魅力。包罗万象的典藏，奥妙的生命奇观，丰盛的天然资产，结合现代性的展示，带你探索台湾文化的无限精彩。欢迎光临国立台湾博物馆。
I apologize for the words are so small. Okay, our museum is built in 1908. That is the time during the Japanese colonial time. Japanese colonial time in Taiwan started from 1895 to 1945, totally 50 years. So all the 4 buildings you saw in the clip are built during the Japanese colonial time, including the main building, including a land bank, including a camphor factor, and also a railway department. And all these four four buildings, there's nothing to do with immigrations. But how are we going? How do we do things to attract immigration and to create social inclusion in this 100-year-old museum, which has colonial image and historical background? We want to not to shift the history background, but just try to combine to tell the true things happen in the history, and also include everyone into the museum. Because we have the shared historical memories, and that's something we are trying step by step to do. Okay, and here we're talking about the slide you see here is, you can see, not very clear about Taiwan. I don't know if you can find where Taiwan is. And then I'll talk about the immigrations. Transnational immigration mostly are from the Southeast Asian regions. So that's why I show you the map showing Taiwan and the Southeast Asian regions. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, international migrations from Southeast Asia. We have migrant workers, foreign spouses from Indonesia, the Philippines, Vietnam, and Thailand. But actually, more than that, we have also from Cambodia. We have from Cambodia, Malaysia, Myanmar, and many countries. Okay, so let's see next part. Next slide, please. Next. Thank you. And here, this picture you see here is actually an exhibition I did in 2017. For entering the exhibition, you will see a huge map like this in the entrance of the exhibition. And everyone, every visitor of the exhibition asked me, where is Taiwan? Why I didn't show Taiwan? I say Taiwan just in the map, just because we didn't highlight it. So that's why a lot of people ask me where Taiwan is. But the point is, do you know where we at, how important, and our relationship and the regional, the international regional position that we are in the Southeast Asian region? This is very important, because in Taiwan there is some people still have this kind of concept that we are the center of everything. But if we look at the Southeast Asia map, we are not the center. We are a place, a very important place that people come and go and communicate, and we have a lot of exchanges, and we do commercial with each other. So this is why I show this map in my first exhibition, to try to break down the knowledge, or try to widen the knowledge, the regional knowledge of Taiwanese people. So we have immigrants from these regions of Southeast Asia. Okay, next slide. Here, the national policy to allow the foreign migrant workers to enter Taiwan started in starting in year 2001. The four nations we see in the chart, in the bottom of the chart, they are the four major nations that first opened. The four nations that they have migrant workers that enter Taiwan. So we can see from the left, is the first one is Vietnam. In 2001, in the beginning, when the government just starting to let migrant workers to enter Taiwan, you will see Vietnamese, not that many. But now you look at 10 years after that, it's now 222,000 people of Vietnamese migrant workers, which is a huge number, a huge growth of Vietnamese migrant workers. And then next, we go to Indonesia. Indonesia in the beginning, some of them, and now in 2020, Indonesian migrant workers have exceeding to the highest number among the four countries. And then next we see the Philippines. Actually, in 2001, when the government first started to let migrant workers enter Taiwan, the Philippines, and then the next one you can see Thailand, The Philippines and Thailand, there are two major countries who import the migrant workers. For the Philippines, most of them working in the factories or domestic care. That's for the Philippines in the beginning in 2001. And for the Thailand, people from Thailand, they work in the infrastructure, especially the construction work of the transportation. So all the subway, the highway, this kind of infrastructure are actually built, or the people from Thailand have devoted a lot of their work in helping us have a better transportation in Taiwan. So, however, after 10 years, you will see the Philippines and the Thailand, the migrant workers from these two countries, the numbers are slowing down. There are two reasons. One of it is that the migrant workers, they go to other countries to get higher pay, because in Taiwan the pay for the payment for the migrant workers are still maintaining even very low level, and then the foreign labor agencies, those private owned agencies, they charge a lot of unreasonable money from migrant workers. So since they cannot make any money, or they cannot save any money in Taiwan, working in Taiwan, they choose to go to other different places. Okay, let's see the next slide. That's for the migrant workers, and let's see the immigrants from Southeast Asia. Most of them, the immigrants from Southeast Asia here, showing the number that the immigrants from Southeast Asia, they come to Taiwan because of marriage. We can see from 2008 to 2020, the light green one, in every chart, there will be three different group of people. The light green one is from China, from mainland China, Hong Kong, and Macau. They are always the highest. They always stay in the highest number because we share the same history, the same language. And the second one is the one in the middle, the blue one. The blue one showing the immigrations from the Southeast Asia. Okay, and the rest of them, you see the very little green ones. They are the outside of Southeast Asian immigrants. So even because the immigrants mostly from China and Hong Kong and Macau, it's not a very big problem to include themselves or integrate with the society, even if there's still some problem. However, because we share the same language, share the same history, so that's not a problem. And but for the immigrants from Southeast Asia, they have a lot of mutual understanding, a lot of difficulties in mutual understanding, the cultural shocks, and the different habits that they need to get used to when they first arrive to Taiwan. And especially in Taiwan, here's the situation that when the ladies they come from the Southeast Asia, they're married to a Taiwanese family. And usually in the Taiwanese family, we have the concept that not everyone, but most of them, we have the concept that since you are married to my family, you should cut the connection with your native family, your original family. So for Taiwanese, if we're married to other people, and then it's easy. If we have argument or something, we just go home, take the bus, go home, take the train, and then we go home. But for these immigrants from Southeast Asia, first of all, they were cut off the relationship from their native family. What if they have arguments? They have suffered the domestic violence. They suffer problems. They cannot just take a train and go home. They need to look for help. Years ago, the social protecting system is not that well established. Recently, it's now better and better. And these immigrants from Southeast Asia, they also have their own NGOs to help each other. This is a very good thing, and it's something we need to keep working on. and to let them know there's always your right to stand out, stand up for yourself. So this is a brief explanation of the population situation in Taiwan. Next slide, please. Next slide. Okay, so after the immigrations or migrant workers, after they came to Taiwan, we can have some. Actually, they will find some places here only shows the migrant workers. When they arrive Taiwan, they live in the factory. They live in the dormitory of the factory, and then during the weekend, they only have 1 day off in every month. So in that 1 day off in every month, they were gathered. They gathered together in Taipei, in Taichung, and in Tainan, Kaohsiung, especially near the main train station. So we will see all these places are the place or the attractions that on the particular Sunday, they're all gathered together. So if I need to find my friends, I'll go to these places to see if they're there, or just sit down and join them and have a chat and talk, all the things. But they're all outside of the museum. Our museum is next to Taipei main station, but they never get in. So I'll show you how we try to bring them into the museum later. So these are the beautiful things. For me, they are beautiful things. All these foreign migrant workers gather together, enjoy the Southeast Asian food. You don't have to pay the plane ticket or fly to Southeast Asia. Then you can enjoy all different varieties of the culture and the food culture. Okay, next slide. Next slide, please. And here, I just mentioned 10 years ago, the social protection, the protection system for the migrant workers or the immigrants are not that well established. But there are some NGOs are really focusing on helping these people. So these are the protesting of migrant workers. They want to how to say that? They want to abolish some unreasonable laws or restrictions of migrant workers. So they have protesting like this. I love this kind of protesting because showing their voice is very important for every change, for all these unfair, unjust things in a society. There's always need a very loud voice so the government will hear you. If you don't say anything, no one will do anything for you. So I always very supportive to this kind of protest of the migrant workers and immigrations. So this is what we will also have in Taiwan society. But because in recent years there are COVID-19 situation, the protesting like this is we always have that. I think in October every year, it's always very huge protesting. But this year, the passing 2-3 years are stopped because the factory owners, they do not allow the migrant workers to leave the factory just for their safety or something, to protect their migrant workers. Okay, so next slide, please. So the present social status of Southeast Asia immigrants in Taiwan, there is a static that's showing that actually every 20 people in Taiwan, there will be one person might have the potential Southeast Asian background. So we shouldn't look at Taiwanese as a place out of Southeast Asian region, but we should look at ourselves as part of Southeast Asian region. So that would help us to understand each other more and better, and then also we will have better or more equal collaboration with each other. So here are 6 different groups that we have that cost every 20 people, there'll be one, all of them have Southeast Asian background. We have immigrants of marriage. We have second generation of cross-national marriages. And the third, we have migrant workers, factory workers, domestic caregivers. And number 4, we have skilled migrant workers, managers, scholars, researchers, engineers. They are also from Southeast Asia. and we have international students from Southeast Asia, and we also have diaspora Chinese with Southeast Asia backgrounds. They look at themselves, and for the number 6, this group people of number 6 is very interesting part is I always told the friends or if I have a lecture, I always tell people that if you meet diaspora Chinese with Southeast Asian backgrounds, you might be interested in their cultural identity. How do they look at themselves? It depends on these people, not depending on you. Because in Taiwan, we have the habit that we like to define who you are. So that's a very, so if you are not, say you are Chinese, I say, no, but you are from Southeast Asia, you're from Indonesia, your passport is Indonesia. Okay, I'm Indonesia, but no, you're from China, you have the Chinese blood or something like that. So I think that's very unnecessary argument, things like that. So anyway, all these 6 group people together, we actually have a lot of people, we have a lot of connection with Southeast Asia, not just historically, also the cultural identity. Okay, next. So museums' role in society. Let's see, the museum's role has been changing very fast, especially in last decade. Okay, let's see next. So here is the new mission of Contemporary Museum. First of all, museums should be independent. We are not working we don't serve for certain political purposes. Okay, and the second, we should initiating proper agenda to represent the human rights issue. So like my museum, we are not the so-called immigration museum, but we still can initiate proper agenda to represent the human rights issues. Okay, and the third is we're having cultural subjectivity. I don't know if that's a better word to say that, but we should have the people with from different culture to be the host of representing their culture, not just the researchers from the museum to talk about Southeast Asian culture, but also the people from Southeast Asia. They should be the host to talk about their own culture. Okay, so we can see the International Museum Day theme in 2017. Talk about the unspeakable history, and then next, I think they will come out. 下一张，再按一下，谢谢。Okay, that's the. Sorry, it's too small. Okay, International Museum Day. I really cannot see anything. Okay, that's too small. Okay, wait a second. I'll try to do it with my own part or with my own slide. And okay, so for the 2018, that's called the International Museum Day is Hyper-Connected Museums, New Approaches, and New Publics. We use different ways to outreach to new publics. Who are these new publics? For my museum, not just Taiwanese people or not the tourism from the Europe or America, but we should focus on the new public. Those are the Southeast Asian immigrants and migrant workers who just around us and work closely with us every day. So have new approaches to new publics. And the next, 再按一下，谢谢。再按一下，我看一下。Okay, yeah, so these are the different, in every year, like in year 2019, that's diversity and inclusion. So the museum for equality. So diversity, so we should look at the diversity, we should have more open-minded to see the diversity and the inclusion. And next,再按一下，谢谢。Okay, so here is the future of museum, recover and reimagine. With different, when we get involved, when we have more people with more different cultural background, they all get involved into the museum. So maybe we can recover something different. We can reimagine the museum in a different way and represent the museum in a different way. So that's following the International Museum Day things. We're working on this. Okay, next slide, please. So migration and social inclusion, museums, step by step. These are the what we do step by step to show everyone. If there's any questions or you need to ask me, you can maybe leave it in the question box. So first of all, we can see the first one is in year 2014 we have an exhibition called Islamic Life and Culture. And for that exhibition, we basically connect every Muslim group in Taiwan and to curate this exhibition. That's very exciting. You know, the migrant workers, we have domestic caregivers. They are all from Southeast Asia. Most of them are Muslims. They bring their laoban, they bring their boss and the boss family come to the museum to see the exhibition and explain their Islamic culture to the Taiwanese family that they work for. So Taiwanese family would understand the migrant workers cultural background more, to help each other to understand each other more. And after the exhibition, and it's my turn because in the exhibition, the first exhibition, I wasn't in the museum yet. After the exhibition, I started working in the museum. So in that time, the museum has next project called Immigration Docent Project. So we initiating immigrant docent project that we recruit immigrants from Southeast Asian region. The immigrants are the foreign spouses, the mothers who have been in Taiwan for a very long time. They speak both languages very well. We recruit them into the museum, give them the training about very awkwardly that we only speak Mandarin. So all the immigrants from different countries of Southeast Asia, they have to look at the Chinese handout, the handout in Chinese, and they take notes in their native languages. So in that time, that's the first thing that we think we as Taiwanese, as the host country, the people in the host country, we are so limited because we only know one language, that is Taiwanese. And for these immigrants, they speak, maybe for example, speak Indonesia, they speak English, they speak maybe German, because I don't know why. And for the Vietnamese, speak Chinese, speak Cantonese. They also speak French. Some of them, not all of them. Okay, the third step is we have immigrant docents. So after the immigrant docents have closely worked with the museum, they give the museum tour in their native languages for a while. And the next thing, they help us to connect with migration communities in Taiwan society. And then with immigrant docents and migration communities, we start collaboration in cultural events and exhibitions. Next slide, please. So here is the exhibition of Islamic life and culture. This is it's very beautiful, beautiful exhibition. And next one. Next slide, please. Yeah, this is people they can have the opportunity to experience to put on the clothes, traditional clothes when in Islamic culture. And next, please. And here is initiating immigration docent project. So we have immigration. You can see the lady on the left, on the right. She is giving a museum tour in Bahasa Indonesia. Indonesian to the migrant workers. You can see these people here. They are all migrant workers. They actually have a band. And on that day, after they're performing in the museum, we give them the museum tour in their native languages. And next slide, please. And these are the immigrants from Vietnam. So they always, when they come to the museum to give the museum tour, they always wear their national dress or the traditional dress. Okay, next one. And here is a very interesting one. The second from the right, the guy with the blue jacket speaking to three audiences. He is from North Vietnam, and he is a migrant worker. He works in a very huge tire company, the tire for the car. Okay, sorry. So he's from North Vietnam, from Hanoi, and he gives the museum tour to Taiwanese audiences because he speaks perfect Mandarin. He speaks perfect Chinese. So he also has this he's a university graduate degree. So he speaks languages perfectly. So he gives the tour in Mandarin. So because in here the reason,
Emily,
yeah.
Emily,
the
I'm
time
sorry
limit?
to interrupt.
Oh, okay.
But
Okay.
yeah, so could you wrap up and then to make sure we
Okay.
have time for our next speaker and
Okay.
for
Sorry
questions?
about that.
Thanks.
Okay. So
No,
we
thanks.
go to,
Thank you so much.
no problem. We can go to the so 我看一下 can we go to the last picture? The next slide. I'm sorry. The next one. Sorry, the last one. The last slide. 最后一个。最后一张，对对对。Okay, we go to the conclusion. Okay, so the conclusion here is Taiwan is a multicultural society, and each culture share equal respect, and each citizen and migration share equal human rights. That's why the museum are working on this. Also, the international migration and ethnic diversity is new social capital. We should cherish it and use the museum platform to let everyone see that. And immigrants serve as the bridge and window to provide authentic and various aspects of cultural diversity. That's why we should include them as as part of our partners. Okay, so that would be my report. Thank you so much, and sorry for the delaying. Thank you.
No, no problem. It was so interesting and a lot to learn. One of the threads I see in all three of you is this idea of the work we have to do as museums as reimagining what we do, which is great. So our final speaker this morning is Ying Swan, and I'm going to let you just go right ahead.
So, hello everyone. So, I've been serving as the secretary for Kaohsiung Museum of Labor for 5 years, and that experience gave me the insight into how to best communicate and connect with our audience and visitors. So, today I'm going to share with you our practice from 2011 to 2021, and I'm going to share with you some of the reflections and lessons learned after our discussion with our colleagues. Next slide. So the next slide is about the history of our museum. The Labor Museum of Kaohsiung has only a history of 10 years. So it has been relocated to another road and onto another road. In 2010, it was opened on Pier 2 Art Center, which was a very popular environment in area in Kaohsiung, because it used to be a pier, it used to be very busy, and that pier, because there are warehouses, we can see there is strong connection with laborers and the pier warehouse, because the pier is where these laborers are, and we were relocated to Aihe, Love River in 2015. It's a old office building of the municipal government of Kaohsiung. So we don't have a lot of foot traffic of visitors. So after we are relocated to the new venue, we were actually taken out of the environmental context of labor. So this means that we need to struggle. We have to really struggle to attract visitors who come to our new venue. And also because we are moved out of the warehouse, and the warehouse itself is also one of the feature and attraction. So that also reduce people's interest in coming into the building and then see our museum. So now we are struggling with it. Next slide, please. So to give you a little bit of idea of our mission and our objective, this is actually something we have in mind, that we would like to have all the labor history documentation from around Taiwan and have a little bit of international connection. We want to really organize and compile all these data and materials into something that is interesting, so we can engage with laborers and the general public so they can know better about the history of labor. And we hope that with this new venue, we can also build a community awareness in this surrounding neighborhood, so we can also preserve the history of labor. So this is our theme. So that is going to cover a lot of things, which means that as long as this something has to do with labor and labor issues, then those can be a part of our work, can be our theme. So we have around 700,000 of migrant workers in Taiwan. Of course, that means that they're going to be a part of the issues we address here at our museum. So about our organization, this is actually not a independent museum. We are actually under this Kaohsiung municipal government's labor department. So they have a division, a little center that is for the promotion of labor rights. So we are the only organization that is operating the labor museum. So there are altogether 7 members on the staff, and we also have 80 volunteers who serve as our strongest support. So they would help us, for example, help us with the guided tour to our audience and maintenance, and some of our drama programs involve the volunteers. So we rely heavily on volunteers. Of course, the 2 supervisors of these small organization actually carry a lot on their shoulders. They have to be responsible for the operation of the museum. At the same time, they also have to do the works from the labor department. So they have a lot of work on their shoulder. The reason why I'm talking about the organization is because the amount of resources available to you will decide the extent of the work you can do. So this is just I will give you more example about that afterward. It all has to do with our size of our organization. Next slide. So our partners, museum partners or NGO partners probably are wondering that how do we have funding to support our events and activities related to migrant workers. So because we are under Department of Labor, so we can also apply for funding from Ministry of Labor, because they have a employment stability fund, and the fund, some part of them goes to migrant workers benefits. So because the employers, they have to pay a contribution to this employment stability fund. So the fund does cover the management of migrant workers. And for this fund, it usually gives fund to programs that can facilitate understanding between the local community and the migrant community, understanding and awareness between different cultures of different countries. And because this funding comes from Ministry of Labor, so they also think it's very important to highlights that it is because of the migrant workers that we have a solid economic foundation in Taiwan. So the contribution of these migrant workers should be highlighted in these programs. So before 2015, we only apply for funding from Ministry of Labor, and when it comes to the focus the program, we focus heavily on migrant workers. And from 2016, 2017, we started to work with the Ministry of Culture. So they do have a subsidy program and offering funding for programs in alignment with the goals of the southbound policy. And so these policy do focus on the equality part. So because of that collaboration with Ministry of Culture, we started to think about our exhibition, our display, our program should be more pivot toward to like equality goals. So we should really invite the migrant workers to come into our museum. So we would set a goal in terms of funding, and in terms of the allocation of the funding and budget, we can at least do one exhibition or one event featuring migrant workers, and that will be a core part of our museum service. So we do have sufficient funding, which allows us to launch at least one program or one event once a year featuring migrant workers. Next slide. So under this funding under Ministry of Labor, first the migrant workers should be the focus of the program. So the method of forms varies. So we have the most traditional model like exhibition, and we also produced a we also had a theater production. We also published picture books and special books on the theme. And also we have a very unique program. A very famous local documentary director worked with us. We organized a workshop with this director. And this workshop can empower and train the migrant workers themselves to use their cell phone to edit their own video recording, so they can document their own lives in Taiwan and turn that into like small pieces of documentary works. And more details will be offered in the following slides. In 2011, that is actually at the beginning stage of our opening at the new spot. So we have invited university researchers to help us to put together this exhibition, Migrant Labor in Taiwan. So this exhibition includes field research, data analysis, and translation through the form of art into something that can be perceived. So this is a artistic approach to help our visitors to really feel the difficulty or dilemma of being seen and being the one who sees. So we have photos, films presenting the lives of migrant workers, and also some of the pictures come from the migrant workers, so we can actually see from their eyes what Taiwan is like in their own eyes. They would also share the pictures of their families, the medicine they take, and also some of the art crafts they made. Because I was not yet working at the museum in 2011. So I asked a lot of people who have been to the museum. They said that it was really impressive because this is actually exhibition featuring a migrant worker. And that back in that time was quite impressive and quite impactful. Next slide. In 2012, we actually had a stage play production. So I was not really involved in the production of this theater production, but I was really interested in that production. So I asked the staff who work on it. So this project, the first question I would like to know that is that who will be the actors of these theater production. So they have recruited 30 amateurs in Taiwan. So they gave them intensive training of 30 hours. And the entire project also arranged these amateur actors to actually visit the workplaces of migrant workers so they can come back and work on their script. So there were like a tour. So 3 shows were staged and at the venue, which offers up to 1,000 seats. So this story is about a migrant worker slash photographer. And in this slide, I have offered 2 QR codes on the slide. If you're interested in that, you can use your phone to scan the code, and then you can actually see more information and pictures about this theater production. Next slide. About the slide. So in 2012, in October, so we had this exhibition, and some of our Taiwanese citizens offer their picture documenting the lives of migrant workers. So this is more like from the perspective of local Taiwanese and how they see these migrant workers. Next slide. In 2015, we also published a migrant storybook. It's unique in the way that this is actually a book that is presented in different languages. So there is Chinese and also the mother language, a native language of the interviewee, which are the migrant workers. So now the projects I'm going to talk about are more from the perspective of local Taiwanese. Next slide. So in 2016, can you go to the next slide, please? In 2016, this Living with a Vision Back Home. So that was a film director who proposed an idea of having a workshop for migrant workers so we can give the discursive power back to the migrant workers themselves. They can actually talk about their lives in Taiwan. So this project is a workshop for migrant workers, and language can become probably a barrier. If we want to recruit, for example, like migrant workers from 4 countries, it will be a headache to address the language barrier issue. So we decided to take a simpler approach. So we work with a documentary association, and this association, most of their members comes from the Philippines. So language, in terms of language combination, it will be much more easy. So we also have interpreters supporting this workshop, so we can actually help these participants to document their lives, and they can use their own free time to actually document their lives and added those video clips into works. So there was also a final result presentation. If you're interested in their final results, to the bottom right of my presentation slide, there is a list of the videos they made. Next slide. So this is actually the photo taken at the workshop. This is the group photo they have taken. Next slide. So after they have all their works completed, so there was like a jury and judging their work. So for those who won the final prizes, they would be given the certificate and awards. And in 2019, we for the about the topic of migrant workers, we think it is very important to also do some groundwork for education. So we can figure out a way to better communicate with the children about the issue of migrant workers. Therefore, we propose these projects in 2019. So this is the picture book and animation work being released in 2019. The name is World's New World. So there are 9 versions in different 9 languages. And today I'm only giving you here through the QR code, you can actually see the animated work and also the video in English version. So we invited writers, and then they interview migrant workers and experts, and they also talk to the local Kaohsiung illustrator, picture artists to draw, to come up with to work on the book all together. So in addition to picture books, we would also like to put in more knowledge about migrant workers so they can better learn about the life stories of migrant workers. So in addition to the picture book's own story, we also added some of the little facts about SEA region and asked the picture book artist to add more of the pictures into the publication. Next slide. So we also have the final result press conference for the publication of the book and the release of animation. And on the day, we have a storyteller to tell the story to the kids. So next slide. Here at the preview event, we have invited school kids in this neighborhood to come to this event. Next slide. So when we apply the funding from the Ministry of Culture, and it is required that we align with the goals of new southbound policy, and this is an economic policy. So we want to figure out a way to actually be more relevant to SEA. So because in new southbound, the new in Chinese, the pronunciation, it also means heart. So we want to do this promotional project from the bottom of our heart. So we put the heart word here instead of the word new. So we started to think about the possibility of leveraging museum as a venue. And also animation and release of picture books can actually detach us from the venue. So we are no longer limited and restrained by the space and to further reach out to a wider audience. And now we would like to invite these migrant workers back into our museum. So how do we achieve that? And working together for the Ministry of Culture, these are some of the ideas we came up with. In 2017, we had a very interesting board game, and we developed this board game. We wanted to try it out. So we wanted to work with the association we are familiar with. So we work with TIFA, and we have a welcoming party, and also we have a board game. So which is actually a very big real size game of a Monopoly game. So this is similar Monopoly game, but we convert it into Taiwan's own setting. So we design different cards, and these cards, the events have to do with the lives of migrant workers in Taiwan. Of course, there are happy events and sad events. So we invited a group of SEA migrant workers to give us feedback about this board game. They will share with us what happened to them when they came to work in Taiwan. So after the party, after we played the game, they really wanted to borrow this Monopoly set back, and it's because it was really fun. So we have this big real person-sized Monopoly game still in our museum, so the visitors can actually come to our museum and play it with their friends. And in 2018,
Can I interrupt you and ask
Okay.
you to kind of wrap up so we have some time for questions? It's such great, interesting
Okay,
work
okay,
you're
okay,
doing,
okay.
but
I
I want to
will
have time for
let's
questions.
go through it.
Okay, thanks.
So this is actually these are the projects that are based on certain nationalities, but we realized that it's not comprehensive enough. We also need to take migrant workers from other countries into account, and because they probably want to participate. So in terms of the target audience setting for your program, you really need to be very specific about your objective and and goal. So while you're designing this program, who are these programs for, and also would anyone be missed out? So these kind of interactive events, we would like to design it as something that is inclusive and welcoming to everyone. So each year we would have this Southeast Asian Cultural Day where we have like stage performances, and also we have like volunteers giving tours in SEA languages, and with so many different events. One of the drawback is that we don't have a complete, comprehensive data on audience or visitor feedback, so that we can better improve our program next time. So I think we should continue to strengthen our feedback survey data. And in terms of the facility, welcoming, friendly facility, we need to really build a very friendly diversity space that is welcoming to all different visitors. So for all venue like building like we have, maybe we can truly just design an app, because a lot of times we have limited budget. So when the audience they come to the venue, and they can use the app to facilitate their visit experience. So I think this is very important for a welcoming museum space. And working with NGO, which I did not cover before. So I think that is the most important part of my work in the past 5 years, because we are actually an agency under a local government agency, and it's a government institution which is more relevant to the management of the brokerage system. So we often work with NGOs, and NGOs can actually offer a lot of work that is complementary to governmental work. And actually, a lot of times it was the NGOs who are there as the emergency responder to the needs of migrant workers. They know what they want, they need what they need the most, what would be the best way to help them, and how would they want to use this cultural facility. So I think that is the best advantage of working with NGOs, and you would so you would feel that your tax money is not really spent. So I think working with NGO is very important. That's Thank you very much and for your attention. I'm really grateful that I have been invited by National Human Rights Museum, and please do look forward to our upcoming event together with National Human Rights Museum Taiwan. We will have another special exhibition on migration and human rights. We welcome you to Kaohsiung. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Such active work. so interesting in terms of all the different ways, art, theater, online. And I will say you're the first person I've ever seen use a QR code in a PowerPoint, and now I'm really interested in that. So thank you. But we have a couple of questions already in the chat. Michaela, somebody wanted to know about the composition and operation of your community advisory committee.
Yeah, so for each exhibit, part of my job is to kind of recruit that group. And I start with the connections that we already have community, and spend time reaching out to their friends and their friends and generations, multiple ethnic and cultural groups in some cases, you know, multiple kinds of jobs and perspectives on the topic. So there are maybe 10 to 20 people usually in a group, and we meet monthly. And there is a pretty clear process to go step by step to determine the messages and themes and the storyline and the content and the design, so that we kind of are on schedule to get the materials into the gallery. Did that answer the question?
I think so, but I have a follow-up question of my own for that. What happens when your community advisory committee doesn't agree?
Oh, it happens all the time.
I'm sure that's happened.
Yes, yes. And it's one of the most interesting things, you know, none of these communities are monolithic, right? There are many, many different opinions and experiences. You know, we often have some people in the group who want to portray a very positive image of the group and not talk about anything unpleasant or, you know, or bad. And then there are other people who really want to tell a full story and share all the full range of experience. I always tell people there is room for this, for many, many different ideas and perspectives in this gallery, and we really use first person voices to tell these stories. So this person can tell their story, that person can tell that story, and the museum is not saying one is right or wrong. We just want to share multiple perspectives in the same space. So it's not always easy, but often the conversations are very deep and important.
Oh, you've broken up a little, Michaela. Okay, I think we lost. Sorry, you're kind of breaking up back and forth, but great. Another question, which is really for all of you, I think, Rahini, I'll start with you maybe. How do I keep in touch with new immigrants or migrant workers? How do you get in touch with local government or associations? How do you establish your reputation? Visiting families or holding regular community events? Which is basically, I think, a question about how you build relationships with migrant and immigrant communities. So Rahini, you want to start with that?
Sure. Thank you, Linda, for the question. The way we do it is by really, you know, reaching out to various community organizations and then building the relationship. But I think the real work goes in maintaining the relationship even when there is no active program involved in collaboration with the community group. I think it's the ongoing nature of the connection that is the real differentiator. Otherwise, I think museums are typically really good at working with community groups, establishing that relationship, engaging in that, delivering a program brilliantly, but then off they go to the next one. And then, you know, the programming staff don't have sufficient bandwidth to be able to manage that relationship when it's not active. The real work is in that engagement in an ongoing sense, just checking in to see what's happening, and the meetups that happen on a more informal basis as well. So I think we place a lot of emphasis on that. I personally place a lot of emphasis. Most of my work is really in that connection with the community, with people. So I think it's a lifetime of work, really. There's no magic to it other than being passionate about people and being someone that they're able to trust on an ongoing basis because of the way in which you've upheld their aspirations and hopes, and the way you've showed them respect, and where you've seen and heard them.
I'm muted. I'm sorry. It's late at night here, and I'm like, Emily and Ying Swan, do you have anything to add about this process of connecting with communities?
Yes, I think to connect with communities, one thing is because in Taiwan, usually the government will just ask the communities to come to the public sector to do something. But from what I have, the feedback I have is I never know that until they tell me that from our museum we make friends with them first. We welcome them into the museum because we of course we will find we will get to know them from through the NGOs who is helping immigrants or migrant workers. We invite them come to the museum, make them as a core group working with the museum, and we're not just for working. They say I always accompany them. How to say, like gather like friends. So under this kind of building on the mutual trust, the relationship, and then more ideas or events or things will come out. And also because we work with each other as friends, so all the communication become easier because we work with Indonesians, we work with Vietnamese, we work with migrant workers or migrations from different countries. So even though they speak some Mandarin, but because we have immigrant docents, so the docents will be the bridge, help us to communicate with the communities. So it's always, I never know that because I feel always very exhausted because I found I spend a lot of time with them, but I finally, and then the feedback is letting me know all this time spending or devoting to them and spend time with them, with their family, it's all worthwhile. Yeah. So
Great,
it takes time.
Thanks. And I think I do want to add, kind of from my own experience, and I suspect yours as well, it's really important to go outside the museum, to go to places where people gather and people live. Emily, your picture of where the migrants went and hung out on their one day off was such a great example. And I think that's critical. We can't expect people to come into our big, sometimes scary buildings, just when they've never been to a museum before. And the process of going to have tea and to have conversation and to learn more, I think is so critical. But Ying Swan, are there ways that you think about building these connections?
I believe that establishing these connections was very difficult when we were trying to do this in our museum, but I really felt that what Emily's doing is exactly what we're trying to do at the Labor Museum. We're not just trying to work with a certain organization or certain community, but we don't want these we're starting from a small organization, and they decide what they want to do, and then we expand that, and it would be more than just connecting the dots. If we have a small group like that, a central organization like that, it would really benefit and really link to whether or not some of our programs are feasible or not. But I don't think it's necessary to really think about what our museum want to do, but instead you think about what these communities really need, that is what will really attract them to come into the museum.
Great, thank you. And so I've got kind of one final question. I want to be mindful of everyone's time. And audience members, it's been great to have so many of you stick with us the whole time. It's really wonderful. So here's a question. What are some examples of how you've gradually moved from operational approaches that didn't work or difficult situations to a better situation? Or a different way to put it is, what have you learned from failure in working with migrant groups? So, Michaela, you want to start?
Well, I think you know, I learned from every project things that don't work. But one thing I have learned is that it's good to find people within the community who want to do this kind of collaborative work. And there are people who are very strong advocates for one particular point of view, and they're not always the right people to build something together. And so sometimes that could be a person who is an interview for the exhibit, but trying to build the group that where everyone understands that they are all contributing to this collaboration is something I've definitely learned to do, and find roles for people where they will be able to shine and contribute in the way that will work best.
Great. So Emily, what have you learned from failure?
Actually, my museum and Insurance Museum, we all belong to the government. So we're actually under the government, we're the public sectors. So there are so many difficulties, such as the policy or the politically correct, not political correct, let me think. Yeah, so it depends on the political situation or the atmosphere. So there are so many things we need to challenge. The challenges we have is we try to do cultural equity with all the cultural diversity, but maybe the Taiwanese people or the society, they are not advanced enough to understand that this is a necessity to do that. So they will question us. So why, for example, National Taiwan Museum, what is the connection you need to do with the migration communities? What's the connection? And then I say, well, we have thousands of collections from Southeast Asia.
For instance, yeah.
So all these friends from Southeast Asia, they can help us to interpret this collection in the proper way, in the more authentic, more authentic way. So that's why we need to build the connection or the relationship with these communities. So it's very difficult. Actually, it's very difficult. There's a lot of all different kinds of failure, and as the part of the government, there's always people try to challenge you. That why you do this? Why do you do this? But fortunately, we have the new southbound policy. Like Inche mentioned, we have the new southbound policy. So we have the big flag. I don't know if that's the right word. We have the big sign that supporting us to do this.
Ah, excellent.
Yeah.
So I think your lesson from failure is to never give up, as far as I can tell.
Never give up, yeah.
And Ying Swan, what have you learned from failure? And then we'll end with you, Rahini, and we'll wrap up. So what have you learned from failure?
Thank you. Actually, as worker for public sector, I totally feel that. However, Xuwen's museum is bigger one, but we are very specific. We have to be like featuring and focusing on labor, and because that is the core of our thing, so we have to be able to work on only the themes and issues of migrant worker. However, migrants, immigrants, and migrant workers, they have a very similar context, a very similar route of movement. So you should not separate the two from each other, because once you do that, the first issue would be, how can a migrant worker have the time to actually go to a museum? So under the new southbound policy, so this can be packaged as a way to be more friendly or welcoming towards SEA population. So once we can do it, take this approach, you can have a wider audience. So you can address the new immigrants, and you can also address the issues of migrant workers. When you design your program, then you realize that you need to make it lively, interesting to wider audience. And in terms of the practice of the Museum of Labor, the new southbound policy open up a new way, so we can actually campaign for policy change and reach out to a wider range of issues. So I think we can combine the two issues, new immigrants, migrant workers together, that can actually open doors to more opportunities.
Great, thank you. Rohini, you get the last word.
Thank you, Linda. I think a key learning for Immigration Museum has been about this shift from our processes being, particularly with respect to the community gallery, being very museum-centric, to them shifting to starting to be a little bit more community-centric in terms of understanding the capability of the community to really fit in with the museum's practice and processes, which tend to be really tedious, difficult to understand, slow moving. There's a lot of red tape, of course, when you're setting up a gallery, an exhibition based with community. So I think that capacity building piece is now recognized as being really essential to handhold everybody so they understand exactly what they're getting into, and they understand the museum mindset, but that they're enabled to really be able to, therefore, meet the so-called standards, but at the same time, I think with a bit more leniency around some issues that don't need to be as tedious as sometimes museums can make them to be. So I think reducing a bit of that bureaucracy and really building that capacity has been the key thing, because I think from feedback as well from some communities who indicated that the exhibition took a lot longer than they had ever imagined it would, and that it was far more onerous on community who did not understand what they were getting in for. They thought this would be quite an easy exercise, really. They came with all the knowledge and the lived experience and all of that, and then only to find that, oh my God, this is much bigger than what they'd imagined. I think for us it's about really supporting community in that arc of understanding what it takes to work with museums.
To do this work. Great. So I want to thank my 4 amazing presenters today. They were really great. Thank you all for making time wherever you are around the world. It was so wonderful to hear from 2 institutions I know and 2 new institutions for me. This is just the start of, I hope and I know, will be a really incredible 3 days of conversation with so many other people. So you'll get to hear from coalition members, other Taiwanese organizations and NGOs. And so I think we've run a little bit over, but again, thank you all, and particularly all of you for coming and listening. I should always end with saying, feel free to reach out to us at the Coalition if you want to learn more about what we do. Again, thank you all so much for coming.
Thank you, Linda, and a big thanks to everyone.
Thank you, Linda.